I'm 33 years old, and I've been married to my wife Evelyn, who's 30, for 6 years now. Before we tied the knot, we dated for a couple of years. Evelyn has always been outgoing, driven, and very sure of what she wants in life. For the most part, our marriage had been good, but recently things started feeling off. To give some background, I actually met Evelyn at my sister Jenna's graduation. She was one of Jenna's college friends, and that's how everything began. Back then, there was always a lively energy whenever Evelyn, Jenna, and her husband Max were around. They'd share funny college stories, and the whole atmosphere was light and cheerful. Jenna, unlike Evelyn, was more on the quiet side and ambivert like me, so she sometimes felt overshadowed by Evelyn's social nature. Evelyn was the kind of girl everyone wanted to be around in college, a real social butterfly. As for Max, I never thought highly of him. Jenna deserved better. He always had this way of trying to make himself look more important while belittling her, and it bothered me to see her treated that way. But back to Evelyn and me. Lately, our relationship hadn't been great. She still carried that same college party girl energy into her 30s. She works in the design industry, which is very social, so her life was filled with events, late nights, and house parties. I didn't like it, but I never said much because I didn't want to hurt her or make her feel like I didn't support her career. Still, deep down, it created a wall between us. My job doesn't make things easier either. I work in the merchant marine, so I'm gone 6 or 7 months at a time, and then home for the rest of the year. My last trip back home was rough. We argued a lot, sometimes about silly things, other times about more serious issues I'll get to later. No matter how hard I tried, it felt like Evelyn just didn't understand where I was coming from, or maybe she didn't want to. As my vacation days ticked down, I grew restless. I didn't want to head back overseas while things were bitter between us. So I swallowed my pride, set up a nice dinner for her, and decided it was time to talk. She could tell something was on my mind, but she appreciated the effort. I told her straight up that I didn't care if she went out with her friends. What I couldn't stand was her partying until sunrise, then sleeping half the day away. I only had 10 days left at home, and I wanted us to actually spend time together instead of feeling like strangers under the same roof. She listened quietly, nodded, and said she'd put the parties on pause until I left again. Hearing that made me feel relieved. We were finally on the same page. That night we got intimate, but in the middle of it she stopped and started digging through the drawer for protection. She couldn't find any and asked me to go get one. I was frustrated. I asked why we even needed it after 6 years of marriage. I told her I was ready to have a baby, that I wanted to be a father. That's when she looked at me like I was insane and snapped that she didn't want to get pregnant or become a mom. Her words hit me hard. I reminded her that we had talked about kids before marriage, and back then she wanted the same thing I did. I asked why she had changed her mind, and she just shrugged, saying she didn't know. She only knew she didn't want to ruin her body for a stupid baby. That comment made my blood boil. I yelled at her to watch her mouth and stormed out of the room. She came after me, shouting that I couldn't force her into anything. I told her I wasn't trying to force her, but the way she said it was cruel. I eventually came back with protection, but by then the mood was gone. I lay on the far side of the bed, angry and disappointed. Not long after, Evelyn climbed into bed and hugged me from behind. She was crying and whispered that she was sorry. She admitted she was terrified that having a baby would derail her career, and that's why she lashed out. I told her I wasn't angry about her choice, just the way she had said it. I reassured her that I'd never pressure her, even though deep down I truly wanted to be a father and build a family with her. That night, we made up, and eventually we drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to the sound of giggling. I reached over, and Evelyn wasn't in bed. I got up, stepped out of the room, and saw her in the dark, laughing and whispering to someone. For a second, I assumed it was probably a coworker or maybe one of her friends, so instead of making a scene, I went back to bed. Still, it bothered me. It was 2 a.m, after all. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep again. The next morning, Evelyn woke me with a kiss. She was in a cheerful mood and had already made breakfast. Before I could even bring up the night before, she casually mentioned that her cousin had drunk dialed her and that's what kept her up. That explanation eased my mind, and for the first time in weeks, things felt normal between us. We enjoyed breakfast together, joking and laughing, almost like we had rewound to the early days of our marriage. While we were still eating, Jenna called. I watched Evelyn's face light up as she congratulated her over the phone. Curious, I asked what was going on, and Evelyn handed me the phone. Jenna's voice was full of excitement as she told me she was 2 months pregnant. She and Max were going to be parents. My jaw dropped. I teased her for keeping it a secret for so long, and she just said she didn't know how to tell us. I laughed harder than I had in a while, and Evelyn and I quickly decided we'd visit them. My parents were also heading over, so it turned into a small family celebration. Hearing Jenna's news filled me with joy, but at the same time, I felt this hollow ache inside. I wanted that experience too, to be a dad. Still, I pushed that feeling aside and focused on being the proud older brother. When we got there, I wrapped Jenna in a big hug. I was just so happy for her. Evelyn, however, went straight past her and into Max's arms. He scooped her up and hugged her like it was the most natural thing in the world. My parents were already there, and eventually Max's parents showed up too. The whole house was buzzing with energy, but something felt off. Evelyn and Max kept whispering and laughing together, trading inside jokes and looks that left me completely out of the loop. I could tell it was making Jenna uncomfortable. At one point, Jenna jokingly asked Evelyn when she'd give us good news of our own. Max jumped in before Evelyn could answer and told her not to get pregnant or she'd lose her hot body. He laughed it off, but Evelyn doubled down, saying she'd never trade her figure for a baby, and then called Jenna stupid for doing so. My blood ran hot at that. Max piled on, mocking Jenna's body by saying she never had a hot figure to begin with. Everyone went silent, shocked, but he brushed it off as a joke. I snapped. I told Evelyn straight up that being a mother wasn't stupid, and I praised Jenna for having the courage to do something so meaningful. I turned to Max and warned him to stop belittling my sister. Jenna, bless her, tried to smooth it over and insisted it was fine, but it wasn't fine to me. A little later, Evelyn got up and sat right next to Max. I hated the way he touched her, the casual hand on her thigh, the way his fingers lingered at her waist. Then he made the most disgusting remark yet, bragging about how flexible Evelyn was in college, and saying he wished Jenna could be like her. That was it. Rage shot through me, and I told him to be respectful to his wife. I wanted to punch him, but I held myself back for Jenna's sake. Evelyn, instead of backing me up, leaned in and whispered that I was overreacting and that they were just joking. I shot back that mocking someone's body wasn't sarcasm, it was cruel. The anger boiled over, so I stepped outside to cool down. Evelyn followed me, asking what was wrong. I grabbed her by the arms and told her to make Max keep his hands off her, or I'd make sure he regretted it. She looked me dead in the eye and asked why I even married her if I couldn't handle her popularity. That hit me like a slap. I told her this wasn't about popularity, letting another man paw at you was cheap and disrespectful. She bit her tongue and walked back inside. When I finally returned, the sight that greeted me nearly pushed me over the edge, Evelyn sitting next to Max, feeding him spoonfuls of ice cream like some twisted couple. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, told everyone we were leaving, and gestured at Evelyn to follow. Jenna kept asking what was wrong, but I brushed it off, saying I wasn't feeling well and had a headache. The car ride home was silent, but as soon as we got inside, the dam broke. Evelyn tore into me, saying I was insecure and blowing things out of proportion. I fired back, asking her how she'd feel if I put my hands all over some woman and called her flexible. She shrugged and said she wouldn't care, that she'd never change her behavior for me. At that point, I told her fine, live however she wanted, but not to ever disrespect my sister like that again. Evelyn rolled her eyes and insisted that Jenna was her friend before she was my sister-in-law, and that nothing about that day ruined anything for Jenna. We didn't speak to each other for days after that fight. At some point, I realized there was no use trying to talk things through with Evelyn anymore. She just came across as cold and inconsiderate, like my feelings didn't matter. 10 days flew by, and before I knew it, it was time to head back to work for another 6 months. I left with a heavy heart. The night before I shipped out, she finally spoke up and apologized for how she'd been acting. I didn't say much back, just gave her a small smile and hugged her. Deep down, though, something felt wrong. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt uneasy and disconnected, like I couldn't even bring myself to be intimate with her. A week into being back at work, that restless feeling only grew worse. Something about my marriage felt like it was falling apart, and no matter how much I wanted to fix it, I didn't know where to start. Update 1, I returned home 2 weeks ago after 3 months away, and let me tell you, things were worse than they'd ever been. In the past, even when I was gone for 6 months at a time, Evelyn and I never felt this distant. But now, it didn't matter whether I was beside her or half a world away, the gap between us was undeniable. Her attitude had shifted completely. She was flaky, short-tempered, and straight-up dismissive. Every time I tried to video call her, she'd either ignore it or tell me bluntly that she didn't want to talk. No excuses, no I'm busy, just flat-out rejection. She stopped picking up my calls, stopped answering my texts, and it got to the point where I'd sent her over 250 messages in a single day just asking if she was willing to talk things out. Nothing. Radio silence. Meanwhile, her Instagram told a different story. She wasn't exactly hiding it either, there she was, constantly posting about parties, dinners, and social events. This was the first time she had ever treated me this way. On my past deployments, we stayed close through FaceTime, and keeping that romantic and sexual connection alive had made the distance bearable. But now, she cut me off completely, and it didn't feel like she missed me at all. I wasn't just lonely, I was furious. Her behavior felt childish and cruel, and I wanted her to see how it felt. So I started ignoring her too, convincing myself that maybe giving her the same treatment would get a reaction. Evelyn always hated being on the receiving end of her own games. 3 months dragged on like this. I was swamped with work, so eventually I stopped paying attention to her Instagram stories. And then, out of the blue, she called. She actually apologized for ignoring me, claiming she'd been under a lot of stress. I could hear in her voice that she wasn't lying. When I asked what was going on, she admitted something shocking: she hadn't had a period in 3 months. She'd been so wrapped up in work that she'd barely even noticed. I asked if she'd taken a pregnancy test, and she said yes, but the results were unreliable. Her doctor had ordered an HCG blood test instead. I didn't even know what she meant by an unreliable test. I always thought they were straightforward. Either way, the blood work results were due later that day, so I decided to wait. I couldn't focus at all. Hours felt like years. Finally, the report came back: she was 11 weeks pregnant. Evelyn burst into tears over the phone, terrified that a baby would destroy her career. I wanted to beg her to keep it, but instead I told her the choice was hers and that I'd support her. She said the doctor advised against an abortion anyway, since it could be dangerous with her low blood levels. Evelyn had been treated for aplastic anemia as a teenager, so the risk was real. While she cried and worried, my own thoughts went racing in a different direction. I couldn't ignore the fact that we always used protection. So how could she be pregnant? The question screamed in my head, but with her fragile condition, I couldn't bring myself to ask. I filed for emergency leave and made plans to return home, though it still took me over a month to tie up everything at work. I didn't tell Evelyn when I'd be arriving. I wanted to surprise her. But the real surprise hit me the second I walked through the door. There was Max, sitting on our couch, shirtless, fumbling with his belt. My stomach dropped. Fear and rage collided inside me as my mind instantly started spinning its own dark stories about what was really going on. I froze in the doorway like a statue until Max finally noticed me and gave this nervous, half-laughy greeting that only made my suspicions grow. I couldn't call him out straight away, so I returned the greeting and waited. Evelyn appeared a moment later and ran to hug me. I didn't look at her face. I scanned her clothes first and felt a wave of relief when she was properly dressed. She hugged me, thanked me for coming home early, and tried to explain Max's presence. She said she'd asked him to grab some groceries because she was tired, then accidentally spilled juice on his shirt and he'd gone to wash it and was drying off when I walked in. Her voice was so calm that, for a second, I almost believed her. My gut, though, screamed that the whole thing was a lie, and I wasn't going to pretend I didn't notice. I shot Max a cold look. He got the message and awkwardly said he'd go tell Jenna I'd arrived. After he left, I sat down and asked Evelyn again if she really wanted to keep the baby. She bristled and said it was only a matter of time anyway. I couldn't help myself. I brought up the fact that we always used protection and asked how she could be pregnant. She asked if I was accusing her of cheating. I told her I had every right to ask, because I could remember us using protection every time. Evelyn said she'd suspected the condom broke that night. She'd felt something odd but hadn't thought much of it. I told her that if that had happened I would have noticed immediately. She snapped, stood up, and called me pathetic and sick for doubting her. Her defensiveness just fueled my anger. Everything felt wrong. Deep down I knew I probably wasn't the father. I still loved her, but I felt manipulated. The woman who'd always said she didn't want kids was suddenly pregnant and acting like it was all fine. It's been 2 weeks since I got back and we had that fight, and she still won't talk to me properly. Every time I try to approach her she accuses me of being insecure and keeps calling me a doubter. I honestly didn't know how to handle her. Update: a few months passed and life got crazier. First, some good news: my sister gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I'm over the moon that my niece is here, and I'm relieved she won't have to grow up with a deadbeat father. The reason I say that is tied to everything that happened after I got home. The first week after my return, Evelyn was mostly furious at me, blaming pregnancy hormones for her behavior. I was torn up inside, constantly wondering whether the child I might end up raising would even be mine. Then Mom called. Jenna's health took a bad turn and she had to be hospitalized. For the next week I was at the hospital with her. Max was technically around but mostly useless, disappearing whenever he could. I wanted to tell Jenna about my suspicions, but the doctors warned us not to stress her. I waited until she was stable. When she felt a bit better, Jenna grabbed my hands and told me everything. She said that after I left for work, Evelyn started crashing at her place more often. At first it was normal hangouts, but over time Evelyn and Max got more and more wrapped up in each other, to the point where Jenna felt invisible. Jenna snooped on Max's phone one day and found flirty, explicit chats between him and Evelyn, memes, dirty jokes, the whole thing. She confronted them, they apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. Then, the day before I came home, Jenna woke up and found Max and Evelyn making out in another room. She panicked, started bleeding, and had to rush to the hospital. That explained the sudden collapse in her condition. She told me she hadn't told me earlier because she didn't want to ruin things while I was overseas, and because she was too terrified and overwhelmed to think straight. When she finally confronted Max after she got better, he admitted Evelyn was pregnant with his baby. Hearing that broke me. Jenna and I sobbed together. I couldn't believe what she'd been carrying alone. I'd had enough. I decided then to file for divorce immediately, and I wanted Jenna to get full custody of her child so Max wouldn't be anywhere near them. I called Dad and told him to start the paperwork for both my divorce and Jenna's. I told him to push for sole custody of Jenna's unborn baby. I didn't want that man in her life. That night I came home to find Evelyn on the couch, crying. She looked up and said, "You always wanted me to be a mother, but now that I am, you're neglecting me." I laughed, asked her if she'd even heard herself. I wanted her to be pregnant with my child, not Max's. She stayed silent. I told her Jenna had told me everything, that her cheating had nearly cost my sister her baby. I warned her to pray for Jenna and the baby, because if anything happened I would drag both her and Max through the courts and make their lives a living hell. Then I told her to leave my house. Evelyn begged me to stay, claimed Max seduced her and that he'd been the one to push things, and painted a complicated picture about Max craving sex. I felt sick listening to it, disgusted by the excuses, by the betrayal. I gave her 24 hours to get out. I stayed with Jenna for a few days to help, and when I came back, Evelyn was gone. Max seemed to accept what happened. He never tried to fight Jenna for custody or to argue his case. It was like he'd been freed from any real responsibility. The divorces went through. We finally rid ourselves of both of them. Evelyn's father even tried to bribe me, saying I wouldn't have to pay child support if I let Evelyn and her baby stay with me to save face for their family. I could only laugh. That's where things stood: broken promises, a hospital scare, a newborn niece, and two people who made my life a mess. I'm still picking up the pieces.